Have you ever felt overwhelmed, that tightness in your chest, or anxiety when it comes to your podcast, content creation, or just life in general? Well, if you have, you're not alone. And this episode is definitely for you. Today, I'm joined by Sherianna Boyle. She is a podcaster, a radio personality, and she's an author, and we're talking about kicking anxiety in the face. That's right. In this episode, you're going to learn how to identify anxiety versus stress. She's going to give you an entire system on how to process to overcome anxiety, get out of that negative space, and start being your true creative self, and a whole bunch more along the way. So if you haven't started your journey into unpacking anxiety or just dealing with 2020 overall, I really want you to check out this episode. It was a blast talking to her, and I can't wait to share it with you. How can somebody identify those feelings, or if they have anxiety itself?
Anxiety is most known for chronic thinking and chronic worrying. And one of the big distinctions between anxiety versus stress, because stress is, we all have stress, it's part of life, it's not going anywhere. So it's actually good for us, some levels of stress, because it keeps us motivated, it keeps us focused, it gives us courage, really the courage to get on the air and do a podcast. Sometimes those nerves kind of keep you motivated a little bit. Anxiety, on the other hand, it feels more debilitating. It feels like a weight. It feels like it keeps you stuck sometimes. You get overwhelmed. You might feel like things are out of control. I hear that a lot. And the thing with anxiety that's different than stress is stress, you typically have a reason, right? Getting on the air, interviewing someone that you don't really know, or maybe you're a little nervous. There's a reason for that, right? You don't know the person, it's new, it's different. But with anxiety, there doesn't have to be a reason. So that means you can wake up with it. You can literally wake up and all of a sudden you're anxious and you're like, I don't know why, I just woke up.
Yeah.
Like nothing's happened today, and I just feel anxious. And that's the big distinction between the two.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I hadn't thought about putting it into like the comparison between anxiety and stress, which most people probably sort of meld together. Now, the reason I really am happy to have you on the podcast is because you're actually a content creator and a podcaster yourself. You have the Emotional Detox podcast. You're an author. You're doing all kinds of things in content creation. So this is going to make a lot of sense to my audience. So your book is called Emotional Detox. Your podcast is called Emotional Detox. And I have, experimented as a person with anxiety with lots of different ways to resolve those anxieties, therapy, medication, yoga, breath work, meditation, to name a few. These are all things that I'm constantly putting in the mix. But I don't know if I know what is an emotional detox. Is it similar to maybe a social media detox? Can you let us know a little bit more about what's behind an emotional detox?
Emotional detox is something I had to flesh out because it's loosely out there, but no one really dove into the topic. So it's a framework. The foundation of emotional detox is that what I always say is your emotions matter, processing them matters more. And what I mean by that is every time you have a symptom of anxiety, and this is written in my book, Emotional Detox for Anxiety, every time you have a symptom of anxiety, there's going to be an emotion that comes along with that. Now you have a choice. You can pay attention to the symptoms, which is what we've been doing for most of our research and treatment of anxiety. Is okay, you're having, for example, you're having trouble sleeping, or you're nervous, or you have the chronic worrying, or maybe you have some physical things like tension or that problems with your stomach, or your immune system, you get sick a lot, you just don't feel good, right? Those are symptoms of anxiety. And you could certainly say, okay, how can I make this go away? What do I do to make it feel better? And all those things will absolutely help you. But what emotional detox looks at is, well, how about we look at it from another angle? And how about we ask ourselves what emotions are going along with that? And what I have found is a lot of those symptoms are actually ways that we cope and manage anxiety. So I'm going to exchange the word symptom with a management system. So we go into worry as a way to manage an emotion. And what are those emotions? Well, you're not going to really know what those emotions are until you actually process them. You might be able to nail it just thinking about it off the cuff, but that's going to require more thinking. That's going to require analyzing. That's going to require a lot of judgment and self criticism of either yourself or others. So why not give yourself an opportunity? And this is what emotional detox does, to learn how to actually process an emotion. Once you process it, then you gain information. And very often what those symptoms are due to is they're not actually due to emotions that are happening right now, although that feels that way. They're actually due to emotions that you buried in the past.
Okay.
So if you've buried fear or anger, that's contributing.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. And so what you're saying is that for every, you know, anxietal feeling, let's just say, you know, your sort of fear of missing out or something, there could be, or there is an emotional thing that's living underneath in the soil there, like anger or, you know, fear, or one of those feelings that top layer there is just what your brain and your nervous system are sort of exposing to you, but you have to kind of get out that shovel and kind of dig into the dirt a little deeper to like see what's underneath that feeling.
Yes. So on the outside, it might look like your content for your podcast, or maybe your followers, or what the comments, right? That's going to elicit a response, right? You could have anxiety over just, someone says a comment about something, or doesn't say a comment. That can happen that way. And the reality is the person or situation didn't cause that emotion. That emotion was likely already there. It's just you've really done a good job at burying it and putting it aside and avoiding it, or actually misinterpreting what's really happening. So we could spend all this time and energy on saying, okay, well, that's why I feel this way. But that's a lot of that. Honestly, that wastes a lot of energy, and it's incredibly draining. And then you become like this fix it. I got to fix it. I got to make it better. I got to do better. And then you have all of that kind of stuff going on when you could really just get to the root of it. And the reality is, all of us, I'm going to say all of us, have emotions that we've buried in the past. And that's because we were just trained that way. We were trained to manage them. We weren't trained to feel them.
Yeah. So I'm personally doing a lot of work sort of, you know, all the time, but at the end of the year, I get more reflective, and I consider myself a highly emotional person. And I know that, you know, emotional people have a lot of strengths, but they can sometimes have a lot of weakness when it comes to things like reacting to a negative comment or interacting like that. So, you know, how does somebody, you know, we've sort of established that like you can identify your anxiety, but like that's not what you want to put a band-aid on. We're looking more at the foundation of emotions. So, you know, what's like an exercise that you could recommend that somebody could do to sort of pause and see if they could figure out, because that's something I struggle with. Like, what is the emotion underneath? I don't always necessarily know. So what could be something you could do to sort of investigate what's underneath that anxiety?
So in both emotional detox and emotional detox for anxiety, I created the system for that. And it's in the acronym of cleanse. And it's 7 steps, and it starts with a C and it ends with the E. And what I found is that I I would use a tool, for example, breathing, and it would definitely make me feel better, but it wouldn't really shift things in the way that I had hoped to. It felt like it kind of got me through the moment, right? And And that certainly is empowering when you see yourself able to get through things where you normally would have maybe went into reactivity about. But the 7 steps basically teach you how to, number one, you have to get centered, really have to center in yourself and get into your body first. And then the next step I call, it's an L, it's called look inward. And in that step, it's really identifying the emotions without getting into the story. And that's where people get tripped up. They go into this story in their head. So they think, okay, I feel nervous, I feel frustrated. And then they run stories like, this is probably not going to work out. I'm probably wasting my time. There's too much competition. I'm relating it to your audience. And once you start running those stories, what you're doing is you are actually covering up the emotions, which, if they were processed, they could actually help you. So what that second step does, the look inward, is it teaches you how to identify it, and it interrupts the story cycle.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. This is so awesome. I want to sort of like unpack a couple of things. So going back to C, centered, we're talking about like sitting still, maybe upright. Like when you're talking about centering yourself, are you talking about putting yourself in a comfortable position to be able to start to look inward? Is that what centered means?
Yes. So the clear, I call it clear reactivity, which is a choice. And it basically, you're saying to yourself when you sit in a comfortable seated position, and I recommend that you do it on a regular basis. This isn't when you're in the throes of reactivity. This is a regular practice, like you would sit in a seated meditation. The difference between maybe a meditation and this is you're choosing to say, well, number one, we tone the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve comes out the brainstem and it goes all the way throughout your whole body, intersects almost every organ, and it comes out through the colon. And there's many, many ways that you can tone that nerve. And so that step one is about, let me do a couple things to tone my vagus nerve before I start identifying my emotions. So couple of things. One, a simple neck stretch would be toning your nerve. Taking a deep breath is toning that vagus nerve. So similar approach, but different mindset. And as far as, okay, I'm going to tone my nerve because I want to let my body know when I identify this emotion, I am not looking to revisit this in my life. I'm looking to process it. And there is a big difference.
And so the big mistake people make is they sit down, they get centered, and then they're starting to repeat the story that they've told themselves that basically they identify with instead of looking at the feeling that that story creates. Is that semi-accurate?
Yes. And sometimes what people do is they sit down and everything starts to come up, and then they find ways to either discourage that or distract themselves, or they shorten their meditation or whatever it is. It might be conscious, it might be unconscious. So I believe it's really important to make a very conscious choice to just sit down, go through a centering exercise, and acknowledge, I am choosing to acknowledge that every day there's some emotions that come up to be processed every single day, whether you like it or not, they're there. And what I'm doing is I'm carving out space for that to occur, and I'm really honoring them. So when I'm centering myself, I'm basically saying I'm choosing to go into a state of processing.
Okay, awesome. And
I'm choosing to go into a state of
this reminds me, there's a lot of parallels to me sort of with Buddhism, where you're like, you have to face the thing you're running from in order to process it. And so it makes a lot of sense to me as somebody who's read a lot of books in that vein. All right, so we've covered C and L. What would happen in, let's say, E and A?
So for example, L, I would throw in something like, being on a podcast makes me feel, right? Hosting a podcast makes me feel. You would breathe into that. You'd let that emotion to come up. And there's a lot, and you don't get into it. So for example, things come up, nervous, excited, doesn't even matter, good, bad, indifferent. You just let it come up. That's the whole point. E is E is I call it a mit, and it's basically a mantra. So you add a mantra in there, and what we're doing is we're increasing vibration in the body. And so that way, if anything kind of came up like a little bit of a trigger, right? Because that can happen. We get triggered by our emotions. That E is going to just bring you so much comfort, which is a
Okay.
mantra. And it's not very long. Again, the whole process is about 10 minutes. And then after E, you go into the A, which is you go into visualization, just a very quick visualization of where you want to be. How do you want to feel in your body? What would that look like from a visual? You want to feel calm. You want to feel confident. What does that look like in an image? And then the N, which is nourish, which is takes you further into that. And there's guide points there. And then the S is surrender. And that's when we move into that free will, that space of allowing. You have to allow yourself to become this. You want to become whatever it is from inside out, not outside in. It's not about starting what you want to look like. It's about being that vibration. And then you end in the E, which is the ease, which means the I am space, that I am consciousness. So you vibrate confidence, you vibrate reassurance, you vibrate trust. And that's the
Cool.
cleanse.
I like that a lot. So I do have one quick question about sort of the mantra. So do you recommend somebody come up with their own mantra? Do you have recommended mantras in the book or the podcast? Like how does somebody find their mantra and what would like make up a good one?
So I like a mantra where people don't attach too much meaning to it, because again, meaning can get triggering for people. They start wondering, what am I reciting? And so I recommend just the mantra hum, just the hum, the HUM
Yeah. Okay.
sound. That's it, because everybody
Yeah.
hums, right? There's no meaning to that, and it's extremely valuable for your body, the vibration of the hum. And there's a lot of science behind the hum, believe it or not. There's been many books written on it. So I that's the one that I personally use.
Cool. Yeah. And I mean, humming is essentially vibration, right? So if you're trying to get into a positive vibration state,
Yeah.
do you have any quick bits on the science behind humming? I'm just curious. Yeah, that really intrigues me as far as, um, scientifically, what does a hum put you at ease? Is it the repetition? Is there anything you could share on that?
Well, mantras are all about repetition. Mantras are about repeating. So they're a little different than affirmations. You might say two, three times. You might just hang it on your wall. Mantra is actual practice of devotion. And so I recommend that people don't mix and match their mantras. Just kind of pick one. Mantra's a sound, a syllable. As far as the hum, it is incredibly, as far as the health benefits, it tones the vagus nerve like nobody's business. Think of it like a tuning fork.
Oh,
And it is, yeah, yeah, it's incredibly toning, and it will lower, they've done studies on stroke patients. It will lower blood pressure. It will increase circulation, oxygen. It's great for anxiety, everything. It's just all something that you want to do on a regular basis. Think of when you're born. I mean, you make
yep.
noise, right? You make sounds, and mantra is sound. Vibration
Yeah.
is sound.
That's
And
That's really great. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And as
yeah.
podcasters, what are we doing? We're making sound, right? So I think this is something that could be easily implemented by somebody who may be feeling. And I really like how you laid it out in a step-by-step scenario, that you go through these things. It's not just one thing. You're not just meditating. You're not just breathing. You're putting them all together to get yourself closer to that end result, which is feeling better, feeling lighter. You know, how does anxiety play into behavior? Say like new habits or positive habits. Maybe somebody's anxious and they're not feeling like they're reaching their full potential. Are there connections between anxiety and behavior?
Oh, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is people see themselves as, very often they feel alone. They feel unsupported when they have anxiety, and it can cause them to sort of judge those around them and maybe kind of run stories in their heads and not communicate, not ask questions and make assumptions and mind reads. And that creates a lot of conflict. And then, of course, anxiety comes with a lot of fear of conflict. So
Yeah.
a lot of times people don't, they create it in their head, but they don't want it to happen in their life because they don't want to deal with it, because they don't feel they have the energy for it, for whatever it is. So they just kind of shove it under the rug and pretend it's not there. And maybe they dive more into work and they overextend themselves. They go above and beyond what they need to really be doing. And then they can crash and burn that way. So those are all behaviors that anxiety can, that it's there. And distancing yourself from other people, or a lot of social anxiety is
Yeah.
happening now, especially with the pandemic. People are, they're missing connection, but they're also getting a little nervous about getting back out there at the same time because well, one, we're all wearing stinking masks on our face, and
Yeah.
it makes it really awkward to connect. Let's face it, it's not the same. And people are very guarded. So anxiety just makes you, it really just shrinks you. I think it makes you feel small, and can sometimes make you feel, I think, overwhelmed. And that can bring a lot of conversations into, as far as behavior, that, I have no time and I do everything. And that kind of, those
Yeah.
kinds of
The
things
rolling cue of
go
things
along
you
with
tell
that.
yourself, and you get into the cycle that actually will increase anxiety as
Yeah.
opposed to reduce anxiety. And I think the same thing works with vibrations, with positivity, definitely work with negativity. You can get into a negative loop and you have to break that loop somehow. So you had mentioned reactivity. And this is a new
Mm.
term to me, so forgive my ignorance, so to speak. What are a couple ways that we could, you said clear reactivity, right? Is that how you phrased it?
There are some terms in emotional detox that I had to lay out because I realized that some things needed to change, meaning the way that we define things. And so reactivity is a term that I suggest people use rather than anxiety, right? I'm
Okay.
having a reaction. And I don't know if that feels better to you, but it certainly feels better to me. And basically what reactivity is it's a trigger, right? We get triggered, and that's normal. Everybody gets triggered, meaning something comes up, maybe somebody says something or something happens, and you have a reaction. It could be an internal reaction. It doesn't have to be an external, where I say something or they say something to me, but I feel something get tight or constricted, or sometimes I feel like clogged up or heat in the body. That can be signs of a trigger. And then what happens is we go into reactivity, which I define as how we make the uncomfortable comfortable. So I'm having a trigger, and now I want to make that more comfortable. So many of us have learned sort of ways to kind of pretend like everything's fine, or
Mm-hmm.
people please. Like, let's say that somebody's upset with you and you're feeling it like, oh boy, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I shouldn't have, canceled that appointment, or whatever it is. And then you maybe text them and say, oh, I'm so sorry. Or you just that could be a sign of reactivity, because it's your way of actually managing what's coming up for you. So rather than feel the feeling, you do something outside of yourself to try to make it better or to make it stop. So there's many, many ways that we go. I find it absolutely fascinating
Yeah.
to find out all the ways that we try to control or manage our feelings. It's so much easier just to feel them, but yet we've been trained to do that.
Yeah, I love that. There was two things that you mentioned there. Instead of looking at what the problem is, I actually have a post-it note that says, "What's the opportunity here?" So when something comes
Mm.
up that's not necessarily the best thing in the world, I try to look at it and say, like, what is the opportunity behind this? What is this going to teach me? And
Mm-hmm.
then secondarily, we were talking about reactivity as far as like maybe people pleasing. And I think, something that's often overlooked is I also have another post-it note. I'm like Mr. Post-it note over here, but it just says wait a little longer. It says wait a little longer, right? So before you respond to that email or that text message, and I think this is everything that you've explained in sort of that cleanse process is like, get into a good space and don't
Mm-hmm.
just react and use
Mm-hmm.
reactivity to your advantage. And that, could definitely help reduce that. So I'm loving this. This is really great information because not everybody is at this place in their life yet. So I think you have to be in the right place to want to start this journey, right? So I've been doing this for several years and I don't think I'll ever stop because my life has improved by adding these different techniques in to reduce my anxiety. But for somebody who's listening right now who may have never meditated or thought about these things, where's the best place for them to sort of start their journey into an emotional detox or into an emotional detox for anxiety?
Well, I will tell you what I've heard as far as feedback from people who have read the book. And it really, what it does is it's provided me insight on how their journey began into this process. And what they often will say is, the part about the reactions they didn't realize because there's so much in there about different ways that we go into a reactivity. And it's really looking at, is this an emotion or is this a reaction? And I think we've confused people. So the best way I can say it is, when I was going through my emotional detox, I just labeled it this way. It's kind of like your post-it note. If it's not love, it's probably a reaction.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
if I'm not in a space of love, it's I'm probably reacting. And a lot of us have been taught to sort of overanalyze these emotions, whereas I just kind of slide them into the reaction spot, which tells me, what do I need to cleanse? You cleanse the reactions. You don't cleanse the emotions. So when you're releasing something, you're releasing the behavior, the thought, the attitude, the mindset, whatever it is that you're doing to cover up or avoid the emotion is what you're cleansing. You leave the emotions alone. Let them be. They're amazing. They will go into a state of processing automatically. You just have to first you have to become aware. So the first step that you
Mm-hmm.
asked is, you have to become aware of the way that you react and cover up your emotions. That's number one. It helps to sit down and center, but I think now that your audience can kind of hear it from that framework, we can start to walk around after this and say, okay, did I allow myself to feel that, or did I just cover that up? Did I just kind of
Yeah.
shut that door, right? And if I did, that's interesting about me. That was a reaction, and that's something that I could choose to clear. And then you would go through those 7 steps and you'd say, you know what? I choose to clear this way of being and just feel what's coming up naturally. Because the reality is, those emotions, they're so, you could spend a lifetime trying to figure out where they are and where they came from, but they're even beyond that. So why use all your beautiful time and energy that way? Just clear the reactions and let them do what they do naturally, and they will give you unbelievable support. And they work along the laws of the universe, so they're very good for content creating.
Yeah,
Once you
sure.
open
Absolutely.
those emotions up, you're going to really start to get your creative potential going.
Yeah, because if you're spending all this energy worrying and doubting and thinking about all these things, you're not opening up your brilliance to creativity to be able to be exposed, right? So if you're feeling, all these negative feelings, your gift and your positivity isn't going to come out. So it's
Mm.
something that I think everybody needs to at least be aware of, which is why I was really excited to have you on the show. So you actually have a gift for the audience, which is your cleanse gift, the meditation.
Yeah.
So I'm
I
going to put
have
a
a,
link to that in the show notes. Yep.
yep. Yeah, it's called Calm Your Mind
Awesome.
Meditation. Yeah, so people can have that experience. And the big thing is, I think if there's one thing, watch your phone, because the phone is a big way that we interrupt emotional processing. Checking the phone, when you're in the car and you have a moment and you're like, okay, I guess I'll look at my phone, or you're in the grocery line, guess I'll look at my phone. That's an opportunity for you to actually process something. And one of the main ingredients that you need for processing is oxygen. So just by
Mm.
choosing to take a breath and bring that oxygen in the body, you are basically saying, I'm choosing to go to create some emotional processing right now.
Yeah, it's funny how we forget to breathe. We hold our breath, we're tense. So taking that breath, and yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of. Everywhere I go, I look around and everyone's looking at their phones. No one's looking up anymore, and I have to force myself because the software people and everyone has made everything so addictive that your dopamine hit has to happen, so you keep looking at
Mhm.
the phone. But actually, just like sort of existing with something, existing with yourself. And again, sort of going back to like, if you have the awareness that something maybe is off, then you can start that process of taking a look at it. So, um,
Mm.
first of all, I want to thank you for all your wisdom and knowledge. And I hope that the people listening will take this one step further. And the ways that they can take that next step with you is, first of all, the Emotional Detox podcast, right? That's available everywhere.
Yes. So I have the podcast, which it's called Emotional Detox Now. That one's being
Oh,
that's a new season. I actually have a radio show. So I have Emotional Detox on healthylife.net, which is also on my website, Sheriannaboyle.com. So the Emotional Detox radio has been going on for a while. And then I also have the podcast. I have two things.
wow. So you're like a double, you're like double dipping, you're a double
I'm
creator.
double
And then of
dipping.
course you're an author, and people can get Emotional Detox for Anxiety. You just mentioned it's in Barnes and Nobles. I presume it's on Amazon and all the other places online that you can find that book. So, in that book, you're spelling out more detail into some of the things we talked about today. So I highly recommend that if you are feeling like you're not centered, or you think that you could reduce your worry or overwhelm while you're being a content creator and just a person in 2020, right? 2020 is probably basically a dictionary definition of anxiety. So if you can't be clear enough to be healthy mentally, you're not going to make your best work. You're not going to make the best podcast or the best YouTube channel. So I highly recommend that you at least take Sherianna up on her cleanse gift, do the meditation, see how it makes you feel. And is there anything else you'd like to share with the podcast therapy audience while you're here?
Just that think of your emotions as medicine. That's it. They're when they're processed, when they're
Okay.
withheld, right? But they're like your medicine, and they will bring you so many gifts in your life, including new people and people to interview and content, and they're incredible resource.
Well, I want to express my gratitude for sharing all that knowledge. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to do the meditation here and dig into the radio show and the podcast and the book and everything. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Travis.